I'm going to talk here about a legal case that's, for me, particularly depressing for a few reasons. One of them is that it happened in my city or within the jurisdictions of my city, Houghton-le-Spring, which is a town within the city of Sunderland, within the jurisdiction of Sunderland. Um, and it's depressing partly for that reason, but also the nature of this is particularly, it's a sort of crime that really bothers me. Something similar happened, incidentally, in Northumberland also last year. Um, that case, I think I've also made a video about that. Now, in both cases, you have a situation where a gang, a group of teenagers, have killed someone. In the case in Cramlington, Northumberland, um, the victim, I believe his name was Sam Humble, 35-year-old man, young father. He was killed by a gang following a remonstration in which they taunted him and said he looked like Ant and Dec. In this case, the gang responsible, and I am calling them the gang, were out looking for trouble. Now, a few disclaimers here. This is a very recent case, but all the things I'm going to talk about are in the public domain. So I'm going to be quoting out a newspaper report as I try to do with these sort of things so that we have the details. And that's my disclaimer. It's in the public domain. If the victim's family, if his mother was uncomfortable with this video, I would absolutely respect her wishes and take it down. But I believe the issue is legitimate, and I believe it has to be looked at. So without further ado, I'm going to read out the report. Now, I'll probably read out all of it for context, but I want to save a bit of time afterwards, as I usually do with these things, for for placing my own thoughts on this, because, as you might guess, I have strong views on it. Without further ado, I'm going to read this out. Hopefully, I won't lose the video in the process. Um, the report is by Sophie Doughty, and it's actually focusing on the fact that the parents of some of these defendants, well, most of the defendants actually are campaigning for the release. Now, you might think, well, that's not really unusual in its own, because of course the families are going to defend their sons. But this might be a landmark case actually, because all 10 have been convicted of being part of a joint enterprise. So it might actually be one of the first cases that has been prosecuted this way. And I feel, I have long argued, I'll read out the report in a minute, but I have long argued that this sort of vicious gang attack happened, unfortunately, too much in this country, should be prosecuted in a specific way. You know, joint enterprise crime could be something like if you're, I don't know, holding the firearms of an offender, so you're complicit in it. But I think this is one of the first cases to actually address this sort of crime. And for me, it's one of the most depressing and heinous crimes. Okay, so I'm going to read out the report. I should say this is from the 8th of August, yeah, yesterday. The parents of 9 young teens convicted of killing Jack Woodley say they will fight to prove their sons are innocent. Sure is not. Uh, I'll resist my commentary until the end. 10 youths aged between 15 and 18 were handed life sentences at Newcastle Crown Court last week after a jury found them all guilty of murdering Jack in Houghton-le-Spring last year. Houghton-le-Spring's a former mining town just outside Sunderland. The court heard how the 18-year-old victim was surrounded by the violent mob who went on to kick, punch, and stamp on him before he was knifed in the back. I'll read that again because it's very important. Depressing, I know, but very important. The court heard how the 18-year-old victim was surrounded by the violent mob who went on to kick, punch, and stamp on him before he was knifed in the back. One teen, aged 15, admitted delivering the fatal blow, but all 10, who cannot be named for legal reasons, were convicted of murder. How the prosecution told they worked together to isolate and attack Jack, who was from Newton Aycliffe. They worked together to isolate and attack Jack, who was from Newton Aycliffe. That's very significant. Very significant, and I'll come back to that point. By the way, this is from the Chronicle, the Northeast Chronicle. The Chronicle revealed last week how 9 of the teens have submitted appeals against their convictions, and the families have come together to tell of their despair at the verdicts. In a statement, they said they would fight to clear their children's names for the rest of their lives. They said, "We are the families of the 9 young children, young teens, that have been convicted of the joint enterprise murder of Jack Woodley. All of us are incredibly mindful of the life that was lost that night, but all of us know that none of our children intended that Jack die, let alone inflict a fatal blow. None of our children have criminal records, none of them carry knives, and they did not carry a knife the night that Jack Woodley was fatally stabbed." Well, that's implying that you can't kill someone if you don't have a knife, which is just wrong. "Our children be given life sentences for a murder they did not commit. We will spend the rest of our lives fighting for our children, and our children will spend the rest of their lives maintaining their innocence. The courts replace one tragedy with another. Having been convicted of murder, all the teens were handed mandatory life sentences on Friday." I'll just read that bit out again, because again, it's very important. "We will spend the rest of our lives fighting for children, and our children will spend the rest of their lives maintaining their innocence." Maintaining their innocence. It's very important because it points to a mindset of this gang. Um, However, Judge Rodney Jameson determined that the young killers should serve different minimum terms inside. The youth found to have used the knife was told he must serve 17 years before he can be considered for parole, while the other 9 were given minimum tariffs ranging from 8 to 15 years. At the start of the case, Judge Jameson placed reporting restrictions on the case, banning the identity of all 10 defendants from being published, and the families have now claimed this has prevented the public from knowing the true reality of what happened on the night Jack was killed. That may be the only thing I agree with them on, because I think there should be more transparency in cases like this. I think the public have a right to know dangerous people in the midst, among other things. "We, like the rest of the public, are deeply saddened by Jack's death," they said. No, they only care about the fate of their sons. "We feel that if the public want to be angry about the loss of a young man's life, they're justified. However, anger also needs to be directed towards the fact that 10 people were convicted, and out of those 10, only one person killed Jack Woodley, only one carried a knife, only one person got themselves involved with serious violence against Jack. That's simply not true. It's time the public knew what really happened, but because of the restrictions put in place by the judge, there's a real possibility the public may never know the true reality of what happened that night. Our children have been silenced and now they face complete injustice." However, the detective that led the murder investigation has previously said that teams not worked, said that had the teams not worked together to attack Jack, he might not have been stabbed. They worked together. This is the reality. Speaking before the appeals were submitted, Chief Inspector Joanne Brooks of Northumbria Police said each of those children chose to go in with their friends, with their associates, and attack Jack, so they worked together, and if they hadn't done that, would Jack have been stabbed? Would the opportunity to stab him have come along? They worked together and they knew there was a knife. There was definite knowledge, so they were working together. They knew what each other were doing. They knew there were weapons in there, and they chose, in that instant, they chose to go and get involved together and to create an opportunity where Jack had no chance. The case is thought to have been one of the first times as many as 10 defendants have been found guilty of one murder. Jengba Joint Enterprise Not Guilty by Association, a group which campaigns on behalf of those convicted under the controversial Joint Enterprise law, is supporting the families of the defendants. Dan Cunliffe from the group said, "This case is quite unique to have all 10 convicted of murder when there was only one carrying a knife. To the best of my knowledge, that hasn't happened, and they are all such a young age." And the families added, "We never thought this could happen. The children who don't commit murder themselves could be convicted of murder. Why do 9 children have to serve life sentences for a murder they did not commit? This is not justice. Joint enterprise is a bad law that continues to ruin the lives of the innocent." Yeah, that's the end of the report. Okay, there's a lot to digest there. Firstly, this constant insistence on innocence. Well, you have murder and you have manslaughter. Now, in this case, in this specific case, all the reports cited that this group went out looking for trouble and they targeted this young man. They surrounded him and they killed him. Now, it may well be that medically speaking, one of them delivered the fatal blow, but what is a falsehood? Say that the others were just there in the wrong place at the wrong time. And these families, I get it. They don't want their sons to go to jail, right? They're doing what probably parents would do. So I'm not necessarily questioning their motives. It's obvious they don't want their sons to go to jail, although I would question their parenting. I would definitely question the parenting if their sons are going around like a pack of animals terrorizing people in this way. I'm afraid I have not much respect for this sort of narrative that they're children. In England and Wales, the legal age of responsibility is 11. Now, a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old, they're teenagers. I think it is very misleading to call them children. Why? Because how does that read? If you describe teenagers like this as children, that kind of gives this perception that they're not aware of their own decisions, that they're helpless, that um, they don't know right from wrong. Now, nothing in any of the reports have suggested that any of them have learning difficulties or anything like that. That would suggest um, a mitigating factor, that they wouldn't know what they were doing. I've had enough experience of teenage gang members over the years um, to know that they can actually be very assertive, very. I'm not saying intellectually smart, but they know what they're doing. It's a power thing. Teenage boys think they're gangsters. They think they're tough being in a gang like this. So I really have a problem with this constant narrative that they're just children. And I think groups like that one that was quoted, um, I think they're sending a deception that this is about protecting children. Um, as I say, in England and Wales, the legal age of responsibility, whether you agree with it or not, is 11. That was reached by a lot of consideration on how the brain processes right and wrong and a lot of other things. You can say that's too young, but that is a legal age. Now, these killers were not 11 or 12, they were 15, 16, 17. A 16-year-old can drive, a 16-year-old can smoke legally. So these aren't little children. These boys are close to adulthood. They may not be adults, but they're certainly not children. And I have a big problem with it being described that way. Now, this narrative that they're not responsible because only one of them killed Jack Woodley is complete nonsense because none of the others tried to stop it. It's not like they said, "Oh, you're going too far, stop, stop." They kicked him, they beat him. Yeah, the stabbing was the fatal part, but they targeted this guy like a pack of animals. His mother had shown incredible, incredible dignity and bravery. And for her to hear that these families are clubbing together to try and deny her justice is abhorrent. I mean, the way she's kept her dignity in interviews is incredible. She hasn't lost her temper. She hasn't, which would be totally understandable. She's just been, I think she's been incredibly brave. I really, really hope that the judges in this case don't cave in. Of course, they might have a legal right to appeal um, if they think it's wrong, but I really, really hope this isn't overturned. Many people would indeed say it's too soft. I think in the court of public opinion, the families are saying if the public know the true circumstances. I think if the public knew full circumstances, they would be even more hardline that these thugs should be behind bars. This extremely naive idea that a 16-year-old is harmless. And this isn't about vilifying teenagers. Indeed, the victim was a teenager. This is the thing, some of the main victims of teenage thugs are other teenagers. So this isn't a generation thing like, I'm a 36-year-old man vilifying teenagers. I have enormous sympathy for teenagers who are terrorized by other teenagers. What about them? We talk about the rights of young people. What about the right of young people to be free from crime? What about the right of young victims of crime to get justice? In this case, the victim's dead, so it's a question of his mother getting justice. I mean, think of the scenario where they were free, where they would be free. What's to say they wouldn't want to get revenge on this woman? I honestly wouldn't put it past them, because this was a callous, premeditated attack. Now, what's to say? I mean, you just look at the picture. Where they are free to walk past her house. Houghton Springs is a small place. I mean, I think that is unconscionable. Unconscionable. And I hope this sets a precedent. I really hope it sets a precedent. Now, clearly, this is different from, let's say, a joint enterprise where you have someone who's living in a house, right? And let's say they're, I don't know, let's say they are a landlord and they let out to someone who later turns out to be a criminal. And the landlord genuinely didn't know that, and they're charged with joint enterprise. I can understand situations like that where it can be unfair, but in a case like this, where the defendants are clearly working together, it doesn't matter that none of them have knives. As for having no criminal record, I'm guessing they've just got lucky. I find it extremely hard to believe that this gang were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. That is preposterous. Given the information that's available, it's preposterous. I mean, if any of these families can prove that their son was telling the others not to do it, telling the others to back off, indeed, if they were truly innocent, they wouldn't have went along. If they were truly innocent, they knew there was going to be trouble. So the one that knifed the victim, they would have got away from him, or tried to stop him or something. They went along. They went along, they hunted the victim down, and like a pack of animals, they laid into him. It's pure evil, and I'm actually kind of disgusted by this group that's trying to exonerate them. Why? Because they're teenagers. Um, I think that they are really deluded if they think a 16 or 17-year-old is harmless. Now, I could understand if they were actually children, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, in which case they actually wouldn't be legally responsible. But for all the reasons I've stated, the age of criminal responsibility, the premeditated nature of this, the fact that none of them have shown remorse, in fact, the fact they're denying it, I would say that is really contemptible because the evidence is they were there. It's not like, oh, Your Honor, I was in a different place at that time. That's not what's happened here. It's not like mistaken identity or they were in a different place at a different time. And if that does emerge, well, then their lawyers, that's the onus on their lawyers to prove that they weren't there at the time. That isn't the argument. The argument is they shouldn't be culpable because they didn't deliver a fatal blow. That's the only argument that their defense has. So I really, really hope this is thrown out because another trial would only prolong the suffering of the victim's mother. I mean, she's got a life sentence. She has a life sentence. These boys will still be young when they come out. So their parents can cry about what's going to happen, the fact that their sons are being held responsible for what they've done. Jack Woodley's mother has a life sentence. He's never coming back. So it makes my blood boil that people actually try to defend teenage thugs like this. They're not innocent children. They're teenagers who collectively took a decision to hunt a young guy down, corner him, and kill him. And you might argue those who were joining in, they didn't know he would die. I don't think that's enough of a reason to let them off the hook. Yeah, they're probably technically guilty of manslaughter as opposed to murder, but yeah, it is manslaughter, and they're absolutely culpable. I've two main feelings. One is enormous admiration and sympathy for Jack's mother. I should say, by the way, I have no personal connection to this case. I've just been following it because it's happened in my city, and it's a sort of crime that it's just chilling. It's chilling. I mean, if you have feral, violent teenagers going around society terrorizing people like that, it's very dangerous. I mean, any one of us could be a victim of that sort of gang. I think this young lad just happened to be the person they targeted. There's no indication they knew him. So yeah, that's one feeling, just enormous admiration for her, but also deep disgust that people are trying to present this as innocent children being punished for something they didn't do, except they did do. They did do. They're not innocent. They're absolutely not innocent, and they're not children. I think teenagers should be called teenagers because that's what they are. They might be young offenders, they might be juveniles, but they are not children. Anyway, I'll wrap this up, but I think if this joint enterprise law, I must admit I wasn't familiar with it, but if this is covering cases like this, and I think hopefully we'll cover the case in Cramlington as well, that case has been prolonged. Um, the sentencing hasn't happened on that one yet, but I really think, actually, I mentioned Sam Humble. My apologies if the victim's name in that case was Danny Humble. But anyway, I think if you make the choice to be part of a group, and that group does a terrible thing, and you do nothing, if you do nothing to stop the others, if you don't leave, I do believe that you're culpable. Now, I think it's very different if you're part of a group and maybe you're scared of the ringleader. Um, you don't say anything, but if you join in, and this is the real thing about this case, they joined in. They joined in. The fact that they don't have knives is actually irrelevant. You can kill someone without a knife. This idea that you only need a knife to kill someone, maybe the ringleader, I mean, please, he's been put away for 17 years. It's an unusually stiff sentence. Um, Usually for young offenders, it would be softer than that. So that's appropriate. The others, 8 to 15 years, I think eight's a bit lenient. I would say 10 to 15 at least, because of the particularly savage nature of this. I mean, they're dangerous. If they're going to join a gang and hunt an individual down like this, they're bloody dangerous. Um, anyway, I'll put the link to the Chronicle report. It's very depressing. I just hope to God that it's not overturned and these families fail. I understand why they're doing it. It's a totally natural thing, and they don't want their sons to go to jail. Maybe they should question what sort of parents they are. Why was it their sons were in this violent gang in the first place? You know. And as for their pleas, oh, we understand what the victims went through. If they really understood, they wouldn't be prolonging the suffering of his mother by trying to deny her justice. So that's crocodile tears. I don't believe it. I really don't believe it. I think they're only sympathise with their own sons. That's my gut feeling. I can't prove it, but it's my gut feeling. So I do hope that this joint enterprise law, I must admit I wasn't familiar with it, but I hope this is used in other cases. We need much, much tougher penalties for Teenage thugs. Teenage thugs, not children.